As I said, the story I'm Alive comes from Ray Bradbury's novel Dandelion Wine. It is a magical, mystical novel about one summer in the lives of 12-year-old Douglas Spaulding and his brother Tom, younger brother Tom, growing up in a small town in Ohio. On the day of that story, Douglas was seized by the realization that he was alive and that everything else in the world around him was also alive. From that moment forward, the world opened up to him as a grand theater for curiosity and exploration. And he became determined never to take for granted the fact that he was alive, and never to forget that moment of illumination by the miracle of being. I first read Dandelion Wine more than 40 years ago. I've returned to it many times. It has remained a favorite of mine because it captures that primary sense of ontological wonder, that staggering realization that overtakes us from time to time that there is no necessary reason for the existence of the world or for anything in it. As the theologian Paul Tillich said, viewed from the standpoint of the possibility of non-being, being is a mystery. Just the fact that we are is a marvel. The fact that any life at all exists on this planet is cause for astonishment. Or as Walt Whitman put it, a mouse is miracle enough to stagger sextillions of infidels. Now, many of us, most of us, I would bargain, have had or could have epiphanous experiences like Douglas's. I remember similar episodes from my childhood, roaming free through forest and over field when I felt as if my boundaries dissolved and I was overtaken by a sense of rapture and of being one with everything that was around me. Such sensations, though rarer now, I confess, come to me still. But such epiphanies don't just happen in response to the natural world. A man I know equated Douglas's experience to his own, hearing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony for the first time. He said he felt grabbed and throttled by the gods. Such was the extent of joy that overcame him, that music like that existed. One of my women friends relates a time as a teenager when she visited an exhibit of the post-impressionist painter Cézanne and was thunderstruck by the realization that absolutely everything is composed of the very same building blocks of matter. As she described it, it was as if she were suddenly able to look through the exterior of things and even people to see the underlying dynamic atomic structure. She was agape and agog at how all those atoms managed to cohere. And what a miracle it is that everything doesn't just fly apart. Of course, you might expect great art to stimulate such ecstatic experience, if anything were. But I would argue that a sense of ontological wonder, astonishment at the fact of being, is at the heart not only of art and religion, but also of philosophy and even science. Certainly there have been great philosophers and scientists who possess the sense that life in all its diverse and manifold variations is a wondrous miracle. Albert Einstein wrote, "The most beautiful thing that we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and all science. The person who can no longer pause to wonder and stand wrapped in awe is as good as dead." Even the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, whose work gave rise to logical positivism, said humanity has to reawaken to wonder. That the world exists is mystical. Contrary to what some people seem to believe, greater knowledge of the world need not destroy mystery, but can rather deepen an appreciation for the miracle of it all. Even things whose causality is well understood can still evoke wonder. The process of human conception and gestation, for example, can be fully explained. But to witness the birth of a child, that can evoke as great a sense of the miraculous for modern human beings as it did for earlier people whose understanding of the process was far from complete. Indeed, sometimes the more we learn about something, the more we find to marvel at. Take, for example, something as simple as the dirt in your garden. Consider, a single grain of sand can hold up to 100,000 microorganisms like bacteria, fungi, nematodes, and protozoa, all of which are necessary to make your garden grow. And the clay in your garden, which that sand helps to leaven, clay is so intricately structured, it has a phenomenal amount of surface area with which to attract and hold on to other molecules. That's why it sticks like crazy to your shovel when wet. But that same quality, scientists now think, might also explain how organic molecules were able to coalesce nearly 4 billion years ago to create the first life on Earth. Imagine that. We may owe it all to clay. And the monarch butterfly feeding at the milkweed plant in your garden, the milkweed plant which you planted just to invite such a visitation. Well, perhaps you know that individual monarchs have to fly up to 3,000 miles in their annual migration south. 3,000 miles. Now, how is it possible that a gossamer creature like a butterfly can fly that far? While the return journey north can take as many as 5 generations to complete. How does each generation know where to fly? Does knowing these facts about the monarch make their existence any less of a marvel, of a mystery, of a miracle upon mystery? Oh, but I can hear some of you thinking, I think it myself. How can I be waxing ecstatic about awe and wonder when there is so much misery and suffering in this world? Doesn't the prescription to revel in the miracle of being sound indifferent to the unjust and tragic elements of life? A luxury of those who need for naught a first world indulgence. Those are questions that I have wrestled with repeatedly throughout my life and ministry. How do we celebrate life when there is so much suffering and pain? And I always come back to something I heard from a theology professor when I was a doctoral student. This professor was a Catholic priest, and he had spent several years working and living with poor farmers in El Salvador during that country's brutal civil war. During one of our classes, a fellow student lamented how it was impossible to celebrate life if you were conscious of all the suffering in the world. The professor stopped him and said, "Do not be so arrogant as to confuse pity for compassion or to equate dispossession with despair." The professor went on to say that he had never known people more in love with life, more attuned to the wonders of nature, or quicker to a party than the people he had served in El Salvador. And he said that to his mind, you cannot do justice work unless you insist upon everyone's full capacity for joy and celebration, including one's own. My professor's admonition has stayed with me all these many long years. And I have come to believe that the capacity to experience wonder may be a necessary prelude to the ability to experience horror at injustice. For if there is nothing that is wonderful, nothing which is inviolable or sacred in principle, then there is nothing upon which to base our ethics. A poem by Jack Gilbert called A Brief for the Defense puts it this way: sorrow everywhere, slaughter everywhere. If babies aren't starving someplace, they're starving somewhere else. But we enjoy our lives because that's what God wants. Otherwise, the mornings before summer dawn would not be made so fine. The Bengal tiger would not be fashioned so miraculously well. The poor women at the fountain are laughing together between the suffering they have known and the suffering in their future. There is laughter every day in the terrible streets of Calcutta, and the women laugh in the cages in Bombay. If we deny our happiness, resist our satisfaction, we lessen the importance of their deprivation. We must risk delight, enjoyment. We must have the stubbornness to accept our gladness in the ruthless furnace of this world. To make injustice the only measure of our attention is to praise the devil. We must admit there will be music despite everything. We cannot, of course we cannot, nor should we ignore the tragic elements of life. But neither can we defer celebration until we reach utopia either. Indeed, the longer I live, the more convinced I have become that an enduring capacity for compassion and a sustainable impetus for justice must spring from and be fed by a radical appreciation for the miracle of being. For is it not precisely our exaltation at the ontological mystery of creation that moves us to extend creation's bounty to all? Astonishment at existence. The marvel at the fact that we are, the wonder that there is something rather than nothing, the mystery that everything that is derives from the very same source. Astonishment at existence and the gratitude that follows upon such astonishment's heels. That, I believe, is what compels us to reach out, to care, and to use our gifts to bless the world. May it be so.